August 1944. Deep in a frozen bunker beneath East Prussia, General Alfred Jodl stared at the maps and smiled. Patton had overextended 400 miles from Normandy beyond any possible supply line. Physics will stop him where our armies could not, Jodl declared to his staff. But 125 miles west, 958 American trucks were already moving through the French darkness, headlights blazing like a river of fire. The Germans had calculated victory. They had forgotten to calculate American stubbornness. Jodl's pointer struck the map. The sound echoed in the war room at Wolfschanz. "Patton's finished," he said. 400 miles from his supply base. No army can sustain that. The officers around him nodded. Some smiled. The mathematics were perfect. Across 400 miles of French countryside, Patton wasn't smiling. "How long?" he asked. His logistics officer swallowed. 48 hours, sir. Maybe 36. After that, the tanks stop rolling. Then we have 36 hours to solve an impossible problem. Patton turned to his staff. "Get me someone who understands trucks better than tactics." In a requisitioned chateau outside St. Lo, Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayres was already solving it. He spread the maps across a dining table that had once hosted French aristocrats. Now it hosted something more important, a plan that violated every principle of military logistics. "We're building a highway," Ayres announced to the 12 officers crowded into the room. "One lane east, one lane west. Trucks run 20 hours a day, no stops except fuel and driver changes." Captain James Rucard raised his hand. He was young, Mississippi accent, thick. "Sir, the fuel consumption alone. 300,000 gallons per day just for the trucks." The room went silent. "That's more than some German divisions use in a week," someone whispered. Ayres looked up. "The difference is we have it. Detroit makes more trucks in a month than Germany makes in a year. American refineries pump more fuel in a day than they can in a week. So we're not going to be efficient. We're going to be overwhelming." Major William Carter cleared his throat. He was older than most officers in the room, his face carrying the weight of 1,000 careful conversations about things white officers didn't want to hear. "We'll need 23,000 drivers, sir. Most available transport units are..." He paused. "Negro companies." The pause said everything. Ayres didn't pause. "Can they drive 20 hours straight through enemy territory?" "Yes, sir." "Then I don't care if they're purple with green stripes. Get them. We move in 48 hours. Carter allowed himself the smallest smile. "Yes, sir." An officer from Virginia spoke up, his tone careful. "Sir, there are regulations about..." "There's one regulation that matters right now." Ayres cut him off. "Patton stops moving, we lose France. Hitler gets time to reinforce the Siegfried Line. The war extends into 1946, maybe 47. How many American boys die because we were too worried about regulations?" He leaned forward. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what's happening. Dismissed." The room emptied fast. Carter lingered. "They'll fight you on this. Let them. By the time they finish fighting, the trucks will already be moving." Ayres pulled out a cigarette, hands shaking slightly. "Tell me something, Major. Can your men really do this?" "My men." Carter's voice went flat. "My men have been doing the impossible since they were born. They've been fighting just to be considered human. You're asking if they can drive trucks." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sir, that's the easy part." 48 hours. The motor pools exploded into chaos. Mechanics worked through the night, pulling parts from wrecked vehicles, reinforcing suspensions, welding auxiliary fuel tanks. Trucks that hadn't run in weeks roared back to life. Signs appeared painted in urgent red, "Red Ball Express." Private David Henderson stood in the motor pool at 0300 hours, watching his company prep their vehicles. He was 22 from Philadelphia, had been driving since he was 14. But nothing prepared him for this. "You scared?" Private Willie Barnes asked, checking tire pressure on the truck next to his. "Terrified." "Good. Means you're paying attention." Barnes straightened up. He was older, maybe 30, farm background, the kind of man who fixed things because there was never money to replace them. My daddy used to say something. Being scared just means you understand the situation. Henderson laughed despite himself. What situation that we're about to drive 4 tons of explosives through German-held territory with our headlights on? That's exactly the situation. Barnes pulled out a paint can, started writing on his truck panel, Detroit to Berlin. They're really going to let us do this? Henderson asked quietly. Run the whole supply line, Barnes kept painting. They're not letting us do anything. They need us. That's different. And when this is over, when we've proved we can do what they said was impossible. He trailed off. What? Then they can't pretend anymore. They can't say we're not good enough for combat, not brave enough, not smart enough. Barnes finished his slogan, stepped back. They can say a lot of things about us, but they can't say we didn't deliver. Henderson picked up his own paint can. In East Prussia, Colonel Werner von Fritsch was reading reconnaissance reports that made no sense. They're running convoys with full headlights, his aide reported. At night, no blackout procedures. That's suicide. Yes, sir. Except they're not dying. They're just driving. Hundreds of trucks, possibly thousands. Our pilots can't get accurate counts because the columns are too long, and Fritsch felt something cold in his stomach. How long? One pilot reported a continuous line of headlights extending 20 kilometers. But he also said he'd been awake for 36 hours, so we're treating it as unreliable. What if it's not unreliable? The aide blinked. Sir, that would mean they're not fighting a war. They're running a factory. Fritsch stood up. Get me updated intelligence. Every report. I don't care how unreliable it sounds. August 25th, 1944. 0600 hours. Henderson gripped the steering wheel. Behind him, 4 tons of fuel cans. Beside him, Private First Class Robert Walker, who'd never driven anything bigger than a farm truck before the Army. You ready? Walker asked. No. Me neither. The convoy commander's whistle blew. 580 trucks started their engines. The sound was like nothing Henderson had ever heard. Not artillery, not aircraft, just engines. Hundreds of them, creating a roar that made the ground vibrate. Go, go, go! Henderson released the clutch. The truck lurched forward, heavy and ungainly. He found his rhythm settling into the column 20 yards behind the truck ahead. The weight made every bump feel catastrophic. Every turn required planning 3 seconds ahead. Walker was silent for the first hour. Then, you think the Germans are watching? They'd be stupid not to. What do you think they're thinking? Henderson considered. Probably that we're insane. Are they wrong? Probably not. They drove through morning into afternoon. The sun climbed beat down. The cabin became an oven. Henderson's hands cramped on the wheel. His eyes burned from staring at taillights. But the column never stopped. Trucks ahead, trucks behind an endless mechanical centipede crawling across France. At a German observation post near Chartres, Sergeant Klaus Dietrich watched through binoculars. Still coming, he reported into the radio. Same convoy. Been passing for 3 hours. 3 hours. The voice on the radio was skeptical. You're certain? I'm watching it right now. I've lost count. 200 trucks. 300. They keep coming. Are they taking evasive action? Dietrich almost laughed. No, sir. They're driving like it's peacetime, maintaining formation. Some of them have signs painted on the sides. Slogans. What kind of slogans? One says, Hitler, here we come. Another says, express delivery. Dietrich lowered his binoculars. Sir, I don't think they're afraid of us. Everyone's afraid of the Wehrmacht. Not these drivers. At the first relay point, Henderson pulled in behind a fuel truck. His hands were shaking from hours of gripping the wheel. A sergeant banged on his door. 15 minutes, fuel, food, piss in that order. 15 minutes. Henderson stumbled out. His legs barely worked. Walker was already at the fuel pump, moving mechanically. Around them, dozens of other drivers were doing the same, exhausted men forcing themselves through the routine because stopping wasn't an option. How far to the front? Henderson asked a supply sergeant. Another 120 miles. You'll make it by midnight if you keep pace. And then you turn around and do it again. Henderson took that in. How long does this last? The sergeant shrugged. Until Patton reaches Berlin or we all drop dead. Whichever comes first. He grinned. Smart money's on Berlin. 12 minutes later, Henderson was back on the road. Night fell. The convoy's headlights created an artificial day, a river of light flowing east. Henderson's eyes felt like sandpaper. Beside him, Walker had fallen asleep, trust absolute that Henderson would keep them on the road. The responsibility of that trust kept Henderson awake. At a forward command post, Patton received the first supply delivery at 2300 hours. He stood in the darkness watching trucks roll in, drivers so exhausted they could barely speak. "Who authorized this?" he demanded. "Colonel Ayres, sir. He calls it the Red Ball Express." Patton walked to the nearest truck. The driver was black, maybe 25, fighting to stay conscious. His uniform was soaked with sweat. His hands were locked on the wheel like rigor mortis. "Son, how long have you been driving?" The driver's eyes struggled to focus. 20 hours, sir, give or take." "You need rest." "I need to get back for another load, sir." The driver straightened slightly. "They told us you were out of fuel. Said if we didn't deliver the advance stops. Can't let that happen." Patton was quiet for a moment. Then he saluted. The driver's eyes widened. A 3-star general, saluting him. "Carry on, soldier." The truck pulled away, heading back west for another load. Patton turned to his staff. "I want those men's names. Every single driver. When we win this war, I want the history books to know who actually won it." In East Prussia, Jodl was finally reading the updated intelligence reports. "This can't be accurate," he said. "A convoy running continuously for 24 hours, consuming more fuel than they transport." His aide nodded. "Our analysts believe it's propaganda. American psychological warfare." "Or," said Colonel von Fritsch, who'd been summoned to headquarters, "it's real, and we've fundamentally misunderstood how Americans fight wars." "Explain." "We calculate, we plan, we maximize efficiency. The Americans don't care about efficiency. They care about overwhelming force. If it costs them 3 gallons of fuel to deliver 1 gallon to the front, they don't see that as waste. They see it as acceptable loss." Fritsch pointed at the map. "Sir, they're not playing our game. They're playing a game where resources are infinite." "Resources are never infinite. Theirs might as well be. Detroit produces more vehicles in a month than our entire industrial capacity produces in a year. Their refineries operate 24 hours. Their factories never sleep. While we're carefully husbanding our resources, they're burying us in steel and gasoline." Jodl stared at the map, at the pins marking Patton's position, at the arrows showing American advance. "How long can they sustain this convoy?" "Unknown, sir, but longer than we can sustain defense against an enemy who never runs out of ammunition." August 26th, 0400 hours. Henderson pulled back into the motor pool empty truck behind him. He'd been awake for 38 hours. His vision was blurring. But around him, mechanics were already swarming the truck, checking it over, refueling, preparing for the next run. 6 hours rest, a sergeant barked. Then back on the road. Move! Henderson stumbled toward a tent. Barnes was already there, collapsed on a cot asleep before his head hit the pillow. Henderson lay down. His body was vibrating from hours of engine noise. His hands wouldn't unclench. His mind kept seeing taillights, red circles burned into his retinas. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Something he hadn't expected. Pride. For the first time in his Army career, maybe his life, someone had needed him. Not tolerated him. Not accepted him. Needed him. The entire Allied advance, Patton's drive toward Germany, the liberation of France, all of it depended on him driving that truck. The white officers had been wrong. The segregationists had been wrong. The people who said black soldiers couldn't handle responsibility, couldn't be trusted with critical missions, they'd all been wrong. And now everyone would know it. He fell asleep smiling. By the end of day 2, the Red Ball Express had delivered 9,000 tons of supplies. Patton's tanks were moving again. The German defensive line was collapsing faster than they could reinforce it. In Ayers's command post, exhausted officers were updating maps, calculating tonnage, coordinating the growing convoy. "We're exceeding projections," Carter reported. "The drivers are maintaining better time than we estimated. Some are running 22, 23 hours before rest." "They're killing themselves," Ayers said quietly. "They're winning the war." Ayers looked at him. "That better be worth it." "It will be. Not just beating Germany. What comes after? My grandson won't have to ride in the back of a bus because his grandfather proved he was just as good as any white man. Better, maybe." Carter's voice was hard. "That's what makes it worth it." At German headquarters, Jodl was reassessing everything. "Patton is not stopping," he told his staff. "Repeat, not stopping. The supply situation we calculated would halt him, it hasn't. The Americans have created some kind of continuous supply line. We don't understand how, we don't understand why, but it's working." "Recommendation, sir. Reinforce the Siegfried line, immediately. Everything we have, because we're not fighting an army anymore, we're fighting a machine. And machines don't get tired." Outside in the darkness, 6,000 truck engines growled across France. Drivers fought sleep. Mechanics performed miracles. Supply sergeants coordinated chaos into order. The Germans had calculated that Patton would stop. They'd forgotten that American wars weren't won by generals looking at maps. They were won by ordinary men deciding that impossible just meant not yet. Henderson woke after 4 hours, couldn't sleep longer. He walked back to the motor pool, found his truck already prepped, already loaded. A young private was painting something on the side panel. Henderson walked over, looked. The kid had painted, "We don't stop." "That okay?" the private asked nervously. Henderson smiled. "That's perfect." He climbed into the cab. Walker appeared from somewhere looking as destroyed as Henderson felt. "Ready?" Walker asked. "No." "Good answer." They rolled out again. Behind them, hundreds more trucks followed. Ahead, hundreds more led the way. And in East Prussia, in his frozen bunker, General Jodl finally understood. The Americans hadn't broken the rules of logistics. They'd simply decided the rules didn't apply. Day 4. Henderson's hands had stopped shaking. That worried him more than when they'd been trembling. "You get used to anything," Walker said, reading his mind. They'd been driving together long enough that words weren't always necessary. "My daddy worked 18-hour days in the fields. Said after the first week your body just accepts it. Your body accepts it. Your mind doesn't." Henderson shifted gears, feeling the truck's weight resist. "I keep thinking, what if I fall asleep? 4 tons of fuel, 60 miles an hour, 1 second of closing my eyes. Then don't close them. That simple. Has to be." But it wasn't simple. Nothing about the Red Ball Express was simple, despite what the planners had hoped. By day 4, the cracks were showing not in resolve, but in the machinery itself. Trucks that had been pushed 23 hours a day were breaking down. Tires were shredding. Engines were overheating. The human cost was beginning to mount too. At the main depot in Chartres, mechanics worked in organized chaos. Master Sergeant Frank Wilson supervised a repair bay where trucks came in broken and left running barely. He'd been a Ford mechanic in Detroit before the war knew engines the way some men knew scripture. "This one's done," a young mechanic called out, pointing at a truck with a cracked engine block. Wilson walked over, assessed it in 30 seconds. "Pull the engine. We've got a stockpile from write-offs. You've got 40 minutes. Sir, proper engine replacement takes 6 hours. "We don't have 6 hours. We have 40 minutes before the next convoy cycle. You want to tell Patton his tanks stopped because we were being proper." Wilson grabbed a wrench. "I'll help. Let's move." 22 minutes later, the truck rolled out with a salvaged engine that shouldn't have worked but did. Wilson didn't celebrate. There were 37 more trucks waiting. "How long can we keep this up?" his assistant asked. "Long as we have to." Wilson lit a cigarette, hands black with grease. "You know what the difference is between Germans and us? They build things to last. We build things to work right now. Their trucks are better engineered. Ours just keep running because we refuse to let them stop." On the road, Henderson was learning the same lesson. His truck had developed a grinding noise in third gear. The steering pulled left. The brakes were soft. None of it mattered. The truck moved forward, and forward was all that counted. They passed a disabled vehicle on the shoulder, a GMC with steam pouring from its hood. The driver was sitting on the bumper head in his hands. Henderson couldn't stop. No one could stop. The convoy behind him was too tight, too fast. That driver would catch a ride back with an empty truck, and his vehicle would be stripped for parts or pushed into a ditch. "That'll be us someday," Walker said quietly. "Not if we're careful." "Careful?" Walker laughed. "We're driving explosives through a war zone on no sleep. Careful left the building a long time ago." But they kept driving, because what else could they do? At Ayres's command post, the calculations were becoming nightmarish. Colonel Ayres stood over a map covered in red lines, blue circles, endless notations in grease pencil. Major Carter was arguing with a supply officer about tire allocations. "We need 600 new tires by tomorrow," Carter insisted. "We're running trucks on canvas and prayer right now." "I can get you 200, that's it." 200 doesn't solve. 200 is what exists. The supply officer was fraying too. Everyone was. "I can't manufacture tires out of air. We're stripping every depot from here to England. There's nothing left." Ayres interrupted. "Then we run on what we have. Drivers will slow down to reduce wear." "Drivers are already exhausted." "I know what they are." Ayres' voice cracked like a whip. The room went silent. He took a breath, forced calm. "I know what we're asking. But if we slow down, if we reduce capacity, even 10%, Patton's advance stalls. If his advance stalls, the Germans reinforce. If they reinforce, we're looking at another winter of war, another 100,000 casualties, maybe more." He looked at Carter. "How many drivers do we have?" 23,000 assigned, 19,000 operational. "What happened to 4,000? "Accidents, exhaustion, 200 hospitalized, 53 dead." The number hung in the air like smoke. 53 men. Dead. Not from enemy fire, but from pushing themselves beyond human limits. Trucks rolling over on mountain curves. Drivers falling asleep and hitting trees. One had a heart attack at 26 years old, his body simply giving up. "We're killing them," Ayres said quietly. "They're volunteering to be killed," Carter replied. "Every morning I ask for volunteers to run extra shifts. Every morning hands go up. You think they don't know the risks? They know. They're choosing it anyway." "Why?" Carter's smile was bitter. "Because for the first time in their lives, someone's depending on them. Not tolerating them. Not accepting them. Depending on them. You think they're going to give that up?" Ayres turned back to the map. "Find me those tires. Steal them if you have to." At a relay station near Reims, Private James Tucker was loading his truck for his third run in 4 days. He was 19 from Alabama, had lied about his age to enlist at 17. His hands were raw from gripping the wheel. His vision had started to blur around the edges, not from tiredness, but from something else. The medic had called it eye strain. Tucker called it barely holding on. "You good?" his loading sergeant asked. "Yeah." "You don't look good." "I look like everyone else." Tucker climbed into the cab. His partner for this run was a kid named Lewis, even younger, maybe 18. Fresh. Still thought this was an adventure. "First run?" Tucker asked. "Second. Made one yesterday." Lewis was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Is it always this intense?" "This is the calm part." They rolled out. Lewis talked for the first hour about home, about the war, about what he'd do when it was over. Tucker barely heard him. He was counting taillights ahead, counting mile markers, counting the minutes until he could rest. Around hour 14, Lewis stopped talking. Around hour 16, he fell asleep. Around hour 19, Tucker started seeing things that weren't there. Shadows moving at the road's edge lights where no lights should be. He'd heard other drivers talk about it. The hallucinations that came with extreme fatigue. "Stay awake," he whispered to himself. "Just stay awake." But staying awake required more than willpower. It required something to focus on, something to keep the mind engaged. Tucker started talking to himself to Lewis. to the truck to God. My mama said I wouldn't amount to nothing, he said to the dashboard. Said I was too small, too stupid, too black to matter. Well, Mama, I'm driving 4 tons of ammunition to the front line. I'm keeping Patton's army moving. A vehicle ahead swerved. Tucker's reflexes kicked in, yanking the wheel right. The truck tilted, threatening to roll. 4 tons of weight shifted. For one impossible second, Tucker thought they'd go over. Then the wheels grabbed. The truck settled. They were still moving. Lewis jerked awake. What happened? Nothing. Tucker's heart was trying to escape his chest. Go back to sleep. But Tucker couldn't sleep for days after that. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the truck tilting, saw the ground rushing up. At German reconnaissance posts, the reports were becoming increasingly desperate. Lieutenant Hans Keller had been observing the American supply routes for 2 weeks, and what he was seeing defied military logic. They've increased convoy size, he reported to his commander, now running approximately 1,200 trucks per cycle. Consumption rates suggest they're using more fuel to transport supplies than they're actually delivering. That's impossible. No army operates at a loss. The Americans do. Keller showed his calculations. Best estimate, they're consuming 3 gallons to deliver 1. It's the most inefficient logistics operation in military history. Then it will collapse. Sir, it's not collapsing, it's expanding. Keller pointed to his observation notes. They're adding trucks, adding drivers. They're doubling down on inefficiency, and it's working. His commander stared at the numbers. How is this possible? Because they don't care about efficiency, they care about volume. Overwhelming, crushing volume. While we're carefully managing every liter of fuel, they're dumping oceans of it onto the roads. Keller closed his notebook. Sir, we're not fighting a military. We're fighting an industrial civilization that's decided to wage war the same way it builds automobiles, mass production, acceptable waste, continuous output. That's not war. That's madness. Then madness is winning. On day 7, Henderson watched a truck ahead of him burst into flames. The driver was going too fast. The engine overheated and something ignited. The truck swerved, crashed into a ditch, exploded in a ball of orange fire. Henderson kept driving. Had to. The convoy behind him was too close to stop. In his mirrors, he watched as other trucks navigated around the burning wreck, headlights illuminating twisted metal and black smoke. He didn't know the driver's name. Might never know. Just another casualty in a war that didn't involve bullets. Did you see that? Walker asked, voice shaking. Yeah. Shouldn't we? Can't stop. You know that. Walker was quiet for a long time. Then, his family won't even know how he died. They'll just get a telegram saying he died in France. They won't know he burned to death driving supplies. Maybe that's better. How is that better? Henderson didn't have an answer. He just kept driving, adding another ghost to the road behind them. At Patton's forward command, the general was reviewing progress reports. His chief of staff pointed at the map. They'd advanced 180 miles in 1 week. Unthinkable by conventional standards. The red ball is sustaining us, the chief said. Without it, we'd have stopped 3 days ago. What's it costing? In lives, 78 dead, 300 hospitalized. In equipment, we're losing trucks faster than we can replace them. In fuel, we're burning through reserves at rates that terrify the bean counters. Patton walked to the window. Outside trucks were arriving, drivers stumbling out like zombies. Those men are winning this war, not me, not my tank commanders, those drivers. They're destroying themselves doing it. I know. Patton's voice was heavy. But if I tell them to slow down, the Germans reinforce. More Americans die in combat. The war extends into next year, maybe the year after. He turned back. So, I let them destroy themselves, and I hate myself for it. They're volunteers. That doesn't make it right. It just makes it necessary. Henderson's 10th run started at 2,200 hours on day 8. He'd slept 4 hours. His dreams had been full of red taillights and burning trucks. He'd woken up gripping imaginary steering wheels. Walker noticed. You okay? Define okay. Fair point. They drove in silence. The road had become automatic shift, accelerate, watch. The truck ahead, check mirrors, adjust spacing. Henderson's body performed the actions while his mind drifted somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't exhausted and terrified and proud all at once. Around midnight, Walker spoke. "My son was born 3 months ago. Haven't met him yet." Henderson glanced over. "You never mentioned a kid. Didn't seem relevant, but tonight it does. I keep thinking, what if I don't make it back? What if one of these runs is the last one? He'll grow up knowing his daddy died in the war, but not knowing that his daddy did something that mattered." Walker stared out at the darkness. "I want him to know that we weren't just driving trucks. We were changing what people thought we could do. He'll know." "You can't promise that." "I can promise I'll tell him if you can't." Walker looked at him surprised, then nodded. "Same for my folks in Philadelphia. Someone needs to tell them it meant something." "Deal." They shook hands, a solemn pact made in the darkness between two men who understood they might not survive the night, much less the war. At the Chartres depot, Master Sergeant Wilson was looking at maintenance reports that should have been impossible. 93 trucks had been cannibalized for parts. 212 had been written off entirely. Yet the fleet size kept growing because they were receiving new vehicles faster than they were losing old ones. "It's like fighting a hydra," a mechanic said. "Cut off one head, 2 more appear." "That's the American way," Wilson replied. "We don't win by being better. We win by having more." He lit another cigarette, his third in an hour. "You know what scares me? This works. This insane, inefficient, wasteful system actually works. And that means every future war will be like this, not won by tactics, but by whoever can sustain the longest logistics chain." "Is that bad?" Wilson thought about it. "Ask me when the war's over, if we're alive to discuss it." By day 10, the Red Ball Express had transported 89,000 tons of supplies. Patton's army was 65 miles from the German border. The German defensive line was collapsing faster than it could be reinforced. And on a dark road somewhere in France, Henderson was driving his 15th run, hands steady on the wheel, eyes focused on the taillights ahead, mind somewhere between consciousness and dream. Walker was asleep beside him, trusting absolutely. Behind them, 6,000 trucks roared through the night. Ahead of them, German generals were finally understanding what they faced. Not an army, but a machine that consumed fuel and produced victory that measured success not in efficiency, but in overwhelming, relentless pressure. Henderson whispered to himself the same words he'd whispered every night since this started. Just keep moving. Just keep the wheels turning. Just keep going. In the darkness, the convoy answered with the roar of engines that knew no other language but forward. The breaking point came on day 13. Henderson was halfway through his 18th run when his vision doubled. Not blurred, doubled. 2 roads, 2 sets of taillights, 2 steering wheels in his hands. He blinked hard, shook his head. The roads merged back into one, then split again. "Pull over," Walker said. "Can't. You're hallucinating." "I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" Walker grabbed his arm. "Because I've been watching you for the last hour, and you've drifted into the other lane 3 times. You keep talking to someone who isn't there, and just now you swerved around something that didn't exist." Henderson wanted to argue, but Walker was right. The exhaustion had moved past physical into something darker, something that was eating his mind. "We stop, we fail the mission. We crash, we die, along with everyone behind us when they hit our wreck." Walker pointed ahead. "There's a relay station 2 miles up. We switch out there. Someone fresh takes the truck." "That's quitting. That's surviving." Walker's voice went soft. "Your mama was wrong, you know, about you not mattering. But she'll be right if you kill yourself trying to prove her wrong." Henderson drove to the relay station, handed his truck to a driver whose eyes were still clear, whose hands didn't shake. Watched his truck, his responsibility, roll away with someone else behind the wheel. It felt like failure. Major Carter found him 20 minutes later sitting on a crate staring at nothing. "Private Henderson." Henderson stood, saluted sloppily. "Sir." "At ease. How many runs have you completed?" 18, sir." Carter nodded slowly. 18 runs. That's 200 miles, approximately 360 hours of driving in 13 days. You know what that averages to? No, sir. 27 hours per day, which is impossible except you found a way to make it work. Carter sat down on the crate next to him. You're one of my best drivers. You know why? No, sir. Because you know when to stop. Carter pulled out a cigarette, offered one to Henderson. I've got drivers who'll run until they drop dead. I've got drivers who think asking for rest is weakness, but you stopped before you killed yourself or someone else. That's not failure. That's intelligence. Henderson took the cigarette, hands shaking as he lit it. Feels like quitting. It's not. You'll be back on the road in 12 hours and you'll do another 18 runs and maybe another 18 after that. But you'll be alive to do them. Carter stood. The Germans think we're superhuman. Truth is, we're just human enough to know our limits. That's what keeps us going when their armies fall apart. Henderson smoked in silence. Around him, the depot churned trucks, arriving trucks, departing mechanics, crawling under chassis supply, sergeants shouting coordinates. The machine never stopped. But the parts of the machine needed maintenance or they'd break. He was a part. He'd just learned he wasn't indestructible. At German Army Group B headquarters near Nancy, General Heinrich von Luttwitz was conducting what he was beginning to think of as a funeral for traditional military strategy. His staff had assembled every scrap of intelligence about American logistics, and the picture it painted was impossible to counter. They're now running 400 trucks per convoy cycle, his intelligence officer reported. Total daily tonnage has exceeded 500 tons. Fuel consumption for the convoy itself is approximately 350,000 gallons per day. And their advance, accelerating. Patton is averaging 58 miles per day. Our defensive positions can't be reinforced faster than they're being overrun. Von Luttwitz studied the map. Every red arrow pointing east represented American momentum that shouldn't exist. Physics should have stopped them. Logistics should have stopped them. Reality should have stopped them. What about air interdiction, he asked. The Luftwaffe has attempted 17 strikes on the convoy routes. They've destroyed approximately 200 trucks. The Americans replaced them within 48 hours. The intelligence officer's voice was flat. Sir, they're losing trucks to mechanical failure faster than we can destroy them, and they're still expanding capacity. That's not warfare, that's industrial production applied to combat. Yes, sir, and we have no counter for it. Von Luttwitz sat down heavily. He'd fought in Poland, France, and Russia. He'd faced Soviet human waves, British artillery, French resistance. But this was different. This was being crushed under the weight of manufacturing capacity, strangled by supply chains that operated like assembly lines. Recommendations, he asked, though he already knew the answer. Withdraw to the Siegfried Line. Consolidate our forces behind fixed fortifications. Hope that their supply lines stretch too thin. And if they don't stretch too thin, no one answered. Because they all knew. The Americans would just add more trucks. Private Willie Barnes was on his 21st run when he saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Dawn was breaking, painting the French countryside in gold and pink. Beautiful, if you had time to notice beauty. Barnes didn't. He was focused on the road, on the truck ahead, on keeping his distance. Then he saw the people, French civilians lining the roadside. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Standing in their doorways, on their porches, in their fields. Not waving, not cheering. Just watching. Bearing witness. An old woman caught Barnes' eye as he passed. She was crying. She raised one hand, fingers spread in what might have been a blessing or a farewell or simply acknowledgement. We see you, her gesture said. We know what you're doing. Barnes's throat tightened. He'd been driving for so long, focused so completely on the immediate task, that he'd forgotten what the task meant. These people had been under Nazi occupation for 4 years. They'd watched their country carved up, their neighbors disappeared, their children taught to salute a foreign flag. And now they were watching thousands of American trucks roll past, carrying the supplies that would push the Wehrmacht back across the Rhine. Freedom, Barnes realized, had a sound. It was the roar of engines that refused to stop. His co-driver, a kid named Matthews from Chicago, was staring too. They're not cheering. They don't need to cheer. They just need to know we're coming. Think it matters what we're doing. Barnes thought about his son back home growing up in Alabama, where signs said whites only, and opportunities were measured by the color of your skin. Thought about how the Army had given him a uniform, but not full citizenship responsibility, but not respect. It matters, he said finally. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday someone's going to ask how we won this war. And the answer's going to be, black men drove trucks 20 hours a day through enemy territory. Black men kept the army moving when everyone said it was impossible. Black men did what white folks said they couldn't. He glanced at Matthews. Yeah, it matters. At Patton's headquarters, now relocated to Chalons-en-Champagne, the general was receiving reports that should have made him euphoric. Instead, he looked haunted. We've advanced 220 miles in 3 weeks, his operations officer announced. The Germans are in full retreat. We'll be at the German border in days. What's the butcher's bill? Patton asked quietly. Sir, the red ball. What's it costing? The operations officer consulted his notes. As of this morning, 127 drivers dead, 583 hospitalized, 847 trucks destroyed or written off. Fuel consumption totaling 8.7 million gallons just for convoy operations. Patton walked to the window. Outside, another convoy was rolling through trucks laden with ammunition and fuel. The drivers looked like ghosts, hollow-eyed, moving on instinct more than consciousness. I'm going to win this war, Patton said more to himself than his staff. I'm going to reach Berlin, and they'll pin medals on my chest, and history will remember my name. But those men out there, most of them won't get medals. Most of them won't be remembered. They're just logistics, just truckers. He turned back. But without them, I'm just a general with empty tanks and grand plans. They're the ones actually winning this war. Should we recommend decorations? Recommend whatever you want. The army will ignore it. Black soldiers don't get the Medal of Honor for driving trucks, no matter how heroic it is. Patton's voice was bitter. But make sure it's in the record. Make sure someone someday knows what they did. On day 16, the system began to show cracks that couldn't be welded shut. Colonel Ayres was staring at maintenance reports that read like casualty lists. The trucks were dying faster than they could be replaced, not from enemy action, from simple mechanical exhaustion. Engines run 23 hours a day didn't last. Transmissions subjected to constant heavy loads failed. Tires worn down to canvas blew out. We need to reduce operational tempo, his chief mechanic reported. 18 hours per truck instead of 20. It'll extend vehicle lifespan by... It'll also reduce daily tonnage by 12%. Ayres interrupted. Which means Patton slows down. Which means the Germans get time to dig in. Which means more casualties when we finally hit their defensive line. He rubbed his face. How many trucks can we keep running at current tempo? For another week, maybe 3,000. After that, we're looking at cascading failures. Then we have a week. And after that... Ayres didn't answer. There was no good answer. They were running a machine past its breaking point, and machines broke. The only question was whether they'd break before or after Patton reached Germany. At a field hospital near Verdun, Dr. Sarah Mitchell was treating casualties that weren't supposed to exist. The Red Ball Express wasn't a combat operation. Officially, drivers weren't in combat. But she was seeing combat injuries, broken bones from crashes, burns from engine fires. One driver who'd lost 3 fingers when a loading gate failed. And exhaustion. God, the exhaustion. How long have you been awake? She asked a driver who'd been brought in after passing out at the wheel. He struggled to focus. What day is it? Thursday. Then, since Monday, maybe Sunday. He tried to sit up. I need to get back. They need drivers. You need to rest. Your body is shutting down. My body can rest when the war's over. He swung his legs off the cot, stood up, immediately collapsed. Dr. Mitchell caught him, eased him back down. You're not going anywhere. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're killing yourself to prove you're worthy. But you don't have to prove anything. You've already done more than anyone should have to do. She checked his pulse, too fast, too weak. Rest. That's an order. You're not my commanding officer. No, but I'm your doctor. And if you get back in that truck, you'll die. Not maybe. Definitely. Is that what you want? He closed his eyes. I want people to see us, really see us, not as porters or cooks or truck drivers, as soldiers, as men who won the war. They will, but you have to be alive for them to see it. Henderson returned to duty after 14 hours of sleep that felt like 14 minutes. His truck was gone, reassigned to another driver, so he was given a new one, a Studebaker that handled like a drunk elephant. He didn't complain. Complaining was time wasted. Walker was waiting at the loading point. Thought maybe you'd quit. Thought about it. But Henderson climbed into the cab. But then I remembered my mama's face when I told her I was joining up. She said, "They'll just make you carry white men's bags." I told her I was going to do more than that. I was going to matter. He started the engine. Can't prove her wrong if I quit. They rolled out into the afternoon sun. Behind them, hundreds of trucks followed. Ahead, hundreds more led the way. The convoy had become eternal, a river of steel and determination that flowed toward Germany like water flows downhill, inevitable, unstoppable, wearing down everything in its path. At a German observation post near Metz, Sergeant Klaus Dietrich was writing what he expected would be his final report. The Americans were close now, close enough that he could hear their artillery at night, see their reconnaissance aircraft during the day. Soon the observation post would be overrun, and he'd either retreat or die. But first he wanted to record what he'd seen. For 17 days I have observed American supply operations, he wrote. What I witnessed cannot be adequately described, only documented. The convoy runs continuously day and night. Trucks damaged by accident or mechanical failure are abandoned on roadside and immediately replaced. The Americans display no concern for efficiency, only for volume. They fuel-waste vehicles, waste resources in quantities that defy military logic, and yet they are winning. I have come to understand that we are not fighting an army. We are fighting a civilization that has industrialized warfare the same way it industrialized automobile production. They do not seek elegant solutions. They seek overwhelming force. They do not husband resources. They drown us in them. If Germany loses this war, it will not be due to tactical failures or strategic errors. It will be because America has more factories, more fuel, more trucks, and more willingness to waste all of them than we can possibly counter. The future of warfare is not being decided by generals. It is being decided by truck drivers who work 20-hour shifts. History will remember Patton. It should remember the men in the trucks. He sealed the report, knowing no one would read it. Intelligence gathering didn't matter when the front line was collapsing, but he'd needed to write it anyway. Someone someday needed to understand what defeated Germany. It wasn't tanks or tactics, it was logistics executed with American excess. On day 20, Henderson was driving through rain that turned the roads to mud. Visibility was maybe 30 feet. The truck ahead was a ghost taillights bleeding red through the downpour. His wipers couldn't keep up. Water poured through gaps in the door seal, soaking his legs. Walker was bailing water out of the footwell with his helmet. This is insane. Yeah. We should stop. Wait for the weather to clear. Can't stop. Henderson said it automatically now. Can't stop had become his mantra, his prayer, his reason for existing. Even if we slide off the road, even if we can't see where we're going, especially then. Because if we stop, everyone behind us stops. The whole convoy grinds to a halt. Patton's tanks run dry. The advance stalls. Henderson squinted through the windshield. We stop, the Germans win. That's simple. It wasn't simple. Nothing was simple. But reducing it to that binary move or fail made the impossible bearable. They drove through the rain for 11 hours. Twice, trucks ahead of them went off the road. Both times the convoy adjusted and kept moving, leaving the disabled vehicles for recovery crews that might come or might not. When they finally reached the depot, Henderson's hands had cramped into claws. It took Walker 5 minutes to pry his fingers off the steering wheel. You can't keep doing this, Walker said. Watch me. But that night, lying on his cot, Henderson couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the road, saw taillights, felt the wheel fighting his grip. His body was in France, but his mind was still driving, would always be driving until the war ended or he died. Major Carter found him at 0300 staring at the tent ceiling. Can't sleep. No, sir. Carter sat down. Me neither. You want to know why? Why, sir? Because I keep thinking about what comes after. We win this war, and we will win what happens to us. We go back to America, back to the South, back to the same segregation, same discrimination. We've proved we can do anything white soldiers can do, maybe more. We've kept an entire army supplied through impossible conditions. But will it matter? Henderson thought about it. Has to matter, sir. Has to. Why? Because if it doesn't, if we go through all this and nothing changes, then what's the point? We might as well have let Hitler win. Henderson sat up. But I don't believe that. I think this is the beginning, not the end. We're showing them what we can do. And once people see that, really see it, they can't unsee it. Carter smiled, but it was sad. I hope you're right, son. I really do. In the darkness outside, engines roared. The convoy continued. Trucks rolled east carrying the future with them, driven by men who'd been told they didn't matter, but were proving with every mile that they were the only thing that mattered. And somewhere ahead, the German border waited. Beyond that victory. Beyond that, a world that would have to acknowledge what these men had done. Or so they hoped. Because hope was all they had left, besides the road, the trucks, and the unbreakable conviction that moving forward was better than standing still. Day 23 brought the first real resistance. Not from the Germans, from the trucks themselves. Henderson was 50 miles outside Verdun when his transmission started grinding. Not the familiar whine of worn gears, but something deeper, more final. Metal eating metal. The death rattle of a machine pushed past all reasonable limits. We're not going to make it, Walker said, hearing it too. We'll make it. Henderson listened to that sound, the transmission's tearing itself apart. Then it tears itself apart after we deliver this load. Henderson kept his foot steady on the accelerator. The grinding got worse. The truck shuddered, fighting against its own mechanical suicide. But it moved forward because forward was the only direction that mattered. They made it another 12 miles before the transmission seized completely. The truck coasted to a stop, engine still running, but power no longer reaching the wheels. Behind them, the convoy adjusted trucks flowing around the dead vehicle like water around a stone. Henderson sat gripping the wheel, rage and exhaustion warring in his chest. 23 days, 12,000 miles, and now stopped by a piece of metal that cost maybe $40. It's not your fault, Walker said. Feels like my fault. A recovery vehicle pulled up a wrecker operated by two mechanics who looked as exhausted as any driver. One jumped out, assessed the situation in 30 seconds. Transmission shot, we'll have to tow it. How long? Henderson asked. To fix 8 hours minimum, but you'll get a new truck, transfer your load, and how long to transfer the load? The mechanic checked his watch. 90 minutes. Got to unload 4 tons of ammunition by hand loaded onto another truck. Do it in 60. Henderson climbed out of the cab, started unhooking his tarp. Walker joined him without a word. Behind them, the mechanic shook his head but pulled up an empty truck and started helping. They finished in 53 minutes. Henderson's shoulders screamed. His hands were bleeding from torn blisters. But the ammunition was transferred, the new truck was loaded, and they were moving again. You know that was crazy, Walker said as they rolled back onto the convoy route. Everything we're doing is crazy. Fair point. At Ayer's command post, the situation reports were approaching crisis. The trucks were failing faster than they could be maintained. Of the original 5 958 vehicles that started the Red Ball Express, fewer than 3 to 200 were still operational. The rest were in repair, stripped for parts, or abandoned as total losses. We can't sustain current tonnage, his logistics officer reported. We're looking at a 30% reduction in capacity within the next week. Ayers stared at the map. Patton was 40 miles from the German border. So close. But 40 miles might as well be 400 if the supplies stopped flowing. What if we pull back on maintenance schedules? Run the trucks harder? Sir, we're already running them into the ground. If we reduce maintenance further, we'll have catastrophic failures. Trucks will start dying mid-convoy. They're already dying mid-convoy. More of them, sir. Potentially a lot more. The logistics officer hesitated. And more driver casualties. The accidents are increasing. We've had 11 fatalities in the last 3 days alone. Ayers closed his eyes. 11 men. Dead. Because he was pushing too hard, demanding too much, treating human beings like replaceable parts in a machine. "What's your recommendation?" he asked quietly. "Slow down. Reduce runs from 20 hours to 16. Increase maintenance intervals. Accept the reduced tonnage and extend the timeline." Patton won't accept that. Patton doesn't have a choice. The system is breaking, sir. We either slow down or we stop completely. But before Ayers could respond, Major Carter burst into the command post holding a radio message. "Sir, intelligence report. The Germans are pulling back from the Moselle defensive line. They're in full retreat toward the Siegfried line. Patton wants to pursue immediately, but he needs maximum supply flow for the next 72 hours. After that, we'll have time to consolidate while his forces dig in at the German border." Ayers looked at his logistics officer. "Can we give him 72 hours at full capacity?" "Sir, can we?" The logistics officer ran the numbers in his head. "Barely, but we'll lose trucks, a lot of trucks, and drivers. The accident rate..." "I'm not asking for projections, I'm asking if it's possible. Technically, yes. Practically, it's suicide for the equipment and the men." Ayers turned to Carter. "Ask the drivers. Not order them, ask them. Can they give us 72 hours of maximum effort? Explain what it'll cost. Let them decide." Carter nodded and left. 20 minutes later, he returned. "What did they say?" Ayers asked. "They said yes. Every single company, every single driver." Carter's voice was tight with emotion. "One of them told me we didn't come this far to stop 40 miles short. Another said, my grandchildren are going to read about this someday. I want them to read that we finished what we started." Ayers felt something break inside his chest. Pride, maybe, or guilt, or both. "Then we give them 72 hours. Henderson learned about the final push at the evening briefing. His company commander, a captain named Reynolds, who'd started treating his black drivers with something approaching respect, laid it out plainly. "The Germans are retreating. Patton wants to chase them all the way to their border, but he needs constant supply flow. 72 hours of maximum runs. After that, we can rest, reorganize, prepare for the final offensive into Germany, but these next 3 days are critical." "What's that mean for us?" someone asked. Reynolds didn't sugarcoat it. "Means you'll run until the trucks die, or you do. Means reduced maintenance, longer hours, higher risk. We estimate we'll lose 100 trucks in the next 72 hours. We'll lose drivers too. Accidents, exhaustion, mechanical failures." He paused. "I can't order you to do this. Command says we have to ask for volunteers, so I'm asking. Who's in?" Every hand went up, not dramatically, not with cheers or declarations. Just quiet, exhausted men raising their hands because the alternative was stopping and they'd forgotten how to stop. "All right then," Reynolds said, his voice rough. "God be with you. All of you." The next 72 hours blurred into a nightmare of motion and determination. Henderson lost track of how many runs he made. 4 or 5 times stopped meaning anything. There was only the road, the truck ahead, the cargo behind. He drove through rain that turned roads to rivers, through fog so thick he could barely see his own hood, through enemy artillery fire that bracketed the convoy. The Germans were retreating, but they weren't defeated, and they made the Americans pay for every mile. On the second day, a truck 3 vehicles ahead of Henderson took a direct hit from a German 88. The explosion was biblical, 4 tons of ammunition detonating simultaneously. The shockwave hit Henderson's truck like a physical wall. His windshield cracked. His ears rang, but he didn't stop. The convoy adjusted vehicles flowing around the burning crater where a truck and 2 men had been seconds before and kept moving. "Jesus Christ," Walker whispered, staring at the flames. Henderson couldn't speak. His hands were locked on the wheel, knuckles white. If that shell had hit 30 seconds earlier, it would have been them. If it had hit 30 seconds later, it would have been the truck behind them. The margin between life and death was measured in seconds, and luck, and neither was under their control. They drove through the night. At one point, Henderson realized he'd been awake for 37 hours. His body had moved past exhaustion into something else, a state of mechanical functioning where consciousness was optional. His hands knew how to shift gears. His feet knew when to brake. His eyes tracked taillights by instinct. He was a machine piloted by a ghost of himself. At a German command post near Saarbrücken, General von Lüttwitz was presiding over the collapse of everything he'd fought to hold. His defensive line was gone. His reserves were depleted. And still the American trucks came an endless mechanical tide that nothing could stop. "We have to blow the bridges," his chief engineer argued. "If we destroy their supply routes, they'll build new bridges, or airlift supplies, or find some other impossible solution." Von Lüttwitz stood up. "I want you to understand something. We're not losing because of tactical errors. We're not losing because of strategic failures. We're losing because we're fighting an enemy that has infinite resources and infinite will to expend them. They don't care about efficiency. They don't care about casualties. They just care about winning. Then what do? We retreat to the Siegfried Line and pray that their logistics finally break down before they reach Berlin." Von Lüttwitz looked at the map one last time, but I don't think prayers work against truck drivers who refuse to quit. On the final day of the 72-hour push, Henderson's truck finally died. Not the transmission this time, the engine itself. Something internal let go with a sound like a gunshot. Oil pressure dropped to 0. The engine seized. He was 8 miles from the delivery point. "We're done," Walker said, stating the obvious. Henderson stared at the road ahead. 8 miles. Might as well be 8,000. Behind them, trucks were already diverting around the dead vehicle. No one stopped. No one could stop. "Get out," Henderson said. "What? Get out. Flag down and empty returning west. I'll wait for recovery." Walker didn't move. "You've been awake for 40 hours. You're not staying here alone. Someone has to stay with the truck. Prevent looting. That's regulation." "Screw regulation." Walker opened his door. "We're both catching a ride back. Let recovery deal with—" An empty truck pulled up behind them. The driver leaned out. It was Barnes heading back for another load. "You boys need a lift." Henderson climbed down from his cab. His legs almost gave out. Walker caught him. "Thanks," Henderson managed. "Don't mention it." Barnes gestured to his passenger seat. "Hop in. We'll get you back to depot, get you a new truck, get you back on the road." "I can't. I've been up too long. I'm done." Barnes laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Son, we're all done. Been done for days. But the job's not finished, so neither are we. Now get in the damn truck." Henderson got in. Walker squeezed in beside him. They drove back west in silence, passing loaded trucks heading east. The river of steel flowed on, uncaring of any individual vehicle's failure. The system had become larger than any single component. At Patton's forward headquarters, now located in a liberated French town called Thionville, staff officers were celebrating. They'd reached the German border. The Third Army was positioned to punch through the Siegfried Line as soon as supplies allowed. Patton wasn't celebrating. He was reading casualty reports from the Red Ball Express. "Final count," he asked his chief of staff. 72-hour push cost us 187 drivers. 93 dead, 94 hospitalized. Total truck losses, 743 vehicles, destroyed, damaged, or abandoned. But we delivered 41,500 tons of supplies. Sustained your advance all the way to the German frontier. Patton walked to the window. Outside, another convoy was arriving. The drivers looked like the walking dead. Some had to be helped from their trucks. Others sat unmoving, staring at nothing. "Those men won this war," Patton said quietly. "Not my tank commanders, not my infantry. Those broken, exhausted truck drivers who kept moving when every fiber of their being screamed to stop." He turned to his staff. "I want every one of them recommended for commendation. I don't care if the Army approves it. I want it in the record." "Yes, sir." "And I want their commanding officers to give them 1 week's rest. No exceptions. They've earned it." On September 11th, 1944, day 30 of the Red Ball Express. Henderson sat in a field hospital bed staring at his hands. They'd stopped shaking finally. The doctors said he'd been suffering from acute exhaustion, dehydration, and something they called combat fatigue, even though he'd never fired a shot. Walker was in the bed next to him, sleeping so deeply that orderlies checked regularly to make sure he was still breathing. A nurse brought Henderson a letter. "This came for you." He opened it. His mother's handwriting sent weeks ago just now catching up to him. "Dear David," it read, "I heard from your commander that you're driving trucks in France. I know I said you'd just be carrying bags, and maybe I was wrong. Your aunt saw in the newspaper that colored soldiers are running supplies to General Patton. She said maybe that's you. If it is, I'm proud. I never said that enough. I'm proud of you. Come home safe. Love, Mama." Henderson folded the letter carefully. His vision blurred from exhaustion or emotion, he wasn't sure. "You okay?" Walker had woken up, was watching him. "Yeah, just got a letter from home. Good news." Henderson thought about it, about his mother's words, about what the last 30 days had cost and what they'd proven, about the road that stretched behind them marked by abandoned trucks and makeshift graves, but also by the knowledge that they'd done something impossible. "Yeah," he said finally. "Good news." Outside, the convoys had slowed. Not stopped, they'd never stop until Germany surrendered, but slowed to a sustainable pace. The emergency was over. Patton had his supplies. The German border had been reached. The Red Ball Express had accomplished its mission, though the mission wasn't officially over. It would continue running in various forms until May 1945. But the desperate, impossible days of August and September 1944, those were done. Henderson closed his eyes. For the first time in 30 days, he didn't see the road behind his eyelids, didn't feel the wheel in his hands, didn't hear the roar of engines. He heard silence, and in that silence, something that might have been peace or might have been simply the absence of forward motion. Either way, for the moment, it was enough. The week of rest felt longer than the 30 days of driving. Henderson discovered that stopping was harder than moving when the body finally relaxed. The mind remembered everything it had suppressed to survive. The crashes, the fires, the faces of drivers who didn't make it back. Sleep brought nightmares of endless roads and trucks that exploded when he tried to brake. On the third day, he found Walker sitting outside the hospital tent at dawn, staring at nothing. "Can't sleep either," Henderson asked. "I sleep fine. It's waking up that's hard." Walker pulled out a cigarette, hands steady now, but something broken behind his eyes. "I keep thinking about Johnson. You remember him, tall kid from Georgia, always singing while he drove?" "Yeah." "He died on day 27. Fell asleep at the wheel, hit a tree. They told his family he died in combat. That's what the telegram said." "Killed in action." Walker's voice was flat. "But he wasn't in combat. He was just exhausted. We killed him by asking too much." Henderson sat down beside him. "We didn't kill him. The war killed him." "Did it? Or did we kill him because we needed to prove something? Needed to show white America that we could do what they said we couldn't?" Walker looked at him. Was it worth it? Johnson's life was proving a point worth that. Henderson didn't answer immediately. It was the question he'd been avoiding since they'd stopped driving. The question that had no good answer. "I don't know," he said finally. "Ask me again in 20 years. If my son grows up in a country that's better than the one I grew up in, if he can eat at any lunch counter, go to any school, be judged by who he is instead of what he looks like, then maybe it was worth it. But if nothing changes," he trailed off, "then we just sacrificed him for nothing." "Yeah." They sat in silence as the sun rose over France, over a continent slowly healing from wounds that would take generations to fully close. On September 18th, Colonel Ayres received orders to begin scaling back Red Ball operations. The emergency phase was over. Patton's army was supplied and positioned. The logistics could return to something approaching normal military procedure, slower, more sustainable, less likely to kill the men operating it. Ayres should have felt relief. Instead, he felt only exhaustion and a guilt that wouldn't fade. Major Carter found him in the command post, staring at casualty lists. "You did what had to be done," Carter said. "I killed 127 men. You saved hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. If Patton had stalled, if the Germans had reinforced, if the war had dragged into 1946. Carter shook his head. You made the calculation that generals have to make. Lives now versus lives later. That doesn't make it easier. It's not supposed to be easy. The day it becomes easy is the day you've lost your humanity. Carter sat down. But let me tell you what you also did. You gave 23,000 black soldiers the chance to prove they were essential. Not supplementary, not support, essential. The Army can't hide that now. They can't pretend we're not capable. When they try to push us back to porter duty after the war, we can point to the Red Ball Express and say, we ran the entire supply line for Patton's advance. We kept the Army moving when everyone said it was impossible. Don't tell us what we can't do. Ayers looked up. You think it'll matter after the war? I think it has to matter. Because if it doesn't, then what was the point of any of this? At Patton's headquarters, the general was composing a letter to the War Department. He wrote in his clear, aggressive script, the success of the Third Army's advance to the German border was made possible entirely by the Red Ball Express motor transport operation. Without the tireless efforts of the drivers, the majority of whom were Negro soldiers, the advance would have stalled and the opportunity to end the war in 1944 would have been lost. I hereby recommend that all drivers who participated in Red Ball operations be recognized for their service. They have performed their duties with courage, determination, and a level of dedication that exceeds that of many combat units. Furthermore, I strongly recommend that the Army reconsider its policies regarding Negro soldiers in combat roles. If these men can sustain a logistics operation of this magnitude under extreme conditions, they can certainly serve with equal distinction in any capacity. He sealed the letter, knowing it would likely be filed and forgotten. The Army wasn't ready to hear what he was saying. But he'd said it anyway because someone needed to. Henderson returned to duty on September 20th. His new truck was a GMC that smelled like fresh paint and ran smoothly without the grinding and wheezing he'd grown accustomed to. It felt wrong somehow, like wearing someone else's clothes. The convoys were different now, slower, more careful. Trucks ran 16 hours instead of 23. Maintenance schedules were enforced. Rest periods were mandatory. It was sustainable, professional, and bore no resemblance to the desperate weeks of August and September. Feels strange, doesn't it? Walker said, as they made their first run under the new procedures, driving like we're not about to die. Yeah. Think we'll ever feel normal again? Henderson considered. I don't even remember what normal felt like. They delivered their cargo routine uneventful and returned for another load. Just another job, just another shift. But Henderson kept looking for something that wasn't there anymore. The edge of desperation. The pressure of knowing that failure meant catastrophe, the strange clarity that came from being so exhausted that only the essential remained. Without that, he felt adrift. On October 15th, the Red Ball Express was officially scaled back to normal supply operations. The special priority routes were dissolved. The red ball markers were taken down. The operation that had sustained Patton's advance became just another logistics function, important but no longer emergency critical. At a ceremony at a depot near Chartres, commanders gave brief speeches thanking the drivers for their service. No medals were awarded. Truck drivers didn't qualify for combat decorations. No citations were read. It was perfunctory official, already sliding into the past. Henderson stood in formation, listening to officers praise the men who made it possible without saying their names, without acknowledging what it had cost, without promising that anything would be different when they went home. Afterward, Barnes found him. The older driver looked smaller, somehow worn down by 30 days that had aged him years. You disappointed? Barnes asked. Little bit. Thought maybe there'd be more. There never is. My daddy was in the last war. Came back expecting people to care that he'd fought for his country. They didn't. Still had to ride in the back of the bus. Still couldn't vote. Still got called boy by white men half his age. Barnes lit a cigarette. But you know what he told me? He said they can take away the recognition, but they can't take away the fact that I did it. I know what I did. And that knowledge that's mine forever. That's supposed to be comforting. No, it's supposed to be true. Barnes smiled slightly. We kept Patton's army moving. We drove when they said we couldn't. We proved every racist assumption wrong. Nobody can take that away, no matter how hard they try to forget it. Henderson wanted to believe that, but belief required energy he didn't have. The war continued through the fall and winter. The Red Ball Express kept running less dramatically, but no less necessarily. Henderson made run after run, the roads becoming familiar, the job becoming routine. He stopped counting miles, stopped counting days, just drove because driving was what he did now, what he'd always done, what he might always do. In December, his company was rotated back to England for rest and refit. Real rest this time, 2 weeks of sleeping in actual beds, eating hot food, not being responsible for anything more important than showing up for formation. Henderson spent most of it sleeping. When he wasn't sleeping, he was writing letters to his mother, to Johnson's family, to other drivers he'd served with who'd been reassigned to different units. The letters all said basically the same thing. We did something important, we made a difference. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. He wasn't sure he believed it, but he needed to say it anyway. On January 7th, 1945, Henderson received a letter from home. His mother's handwriting, but the envelope was thicker than usual. Inside was her letter and a newspaper clipping from the Philadelphia Tribune, a black newspaper. The headline read, "Negro drivers supply Patton's drive into Germany." The article described the Red Ball Express in detail, the tonnages, the distances, the sacrifices. It named names: Henderson, Barnes, Walker Johnson, dozens of others. It called them heroes. It said they'd changed the course of the war. Henderson read it 3 times. Then he showed it to Walker, who read it twice and handed it back without speaking. His eyes were wet. "Someone noticed," Walker finally said. "Someone actually noticed." "Yeah. Think it'll matter?" Henderson folded the clipping carefully, put it back in the envelope. "I think it's a start." The war ended on May 8, 1945. Henderson was in Germany when the news came at a depot near Frankfurt, loading trucks for an advance that would never happen. The announcement crackled over loudspeakers. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Around him, soldiers cheered, cried, hugged each other. Henderson just sat down on the running board of his truck and put his head in his hands. It was over. The driving, the pressure, the fear, the purpose, all of it over. Walker sat down beside him. "We made it." "Yeah. Now what?" That was the question, wasn't it? Now what? They'd proved they could do the impossible, had driven through hell to keep an army moving. But the war that had needed them was ending, and the country they were returning to hadn't changed much while they were gone. "We go home," Henderson said finally, "and we make them remember what we did." The journey home took weeks. Slow transport ships, crowded processing centers, endless paperwork. Henderson arrived in Philadelphia on June 23, 1945. His mother met him at the train station, pulled him into a hug that lasted minutes. "You're so thin," she said, crying. "And old. You look old." "I feel old, Mama." She held his face in her hands. "But you're home. That's what matters. You're home." Except he wasn't home. Not really. Home was the cab of a GMC truck racing through French darkness. Walker beside him, the mission clear and absolute. Home was knowing exactly what he was supposed to do and why it mattered. Home was purpose. Philadelphia was just the place he'd grown up. It wasn't home anymore. On July 26, 1948, President Truman signed Executive Order 99981, desegregating the United States military. Henderson read about it in the newspaper sitting in his apartment, working a job at a factory that paid less and meant less than driving trucks through a war zone had. The order cited many reasons for the change, but Henderson liked to think that somewhere in the Pentagon, in some file cabinet, there was a report about the Red Ball Express, about 23,000 black soldiers who'd run the most important logistics operation in military history, about men who'd proved that courage wasn't white or black. It was just courage. He called Walker, who'd moved back to Georgia. "You see the news?" "Yeah. Took them long enough. But they did it. That's something." "That's something," Walker agreed. "Johnson would have been happy to see it." Yeah, he would have. On September 5, 1969, Henderson attended a reunion of Red Ball Express drivers in Detroit. 73 men showed up, less than 0.5% of those who'd served. So many were gone, died in the war, died after, or just disappeared into the vast complexity of American life. Barnes was there, older, but still recognizable. They hugged like brothers, which in a way they were. "You still driving?" Barnes asked. "Taxicab. Figured I'd stick with what I know." "You?" "Retired. Spend most days telling my grandkids stories they don't believe." Barnes smiled. They ask, "Grandpa, did you really drive trucks in the war? Like it's something fictional, like we made it up." "What do you tell them?" "I tell them yes, and I tell them why it mattered. And I hope they understand that their grandpa wasn't always just an old man telling stories. Once I kept an army moving. Once I mattered." At the reunion dinner, Henderson was asked to say a few words. He stood up, looking at the faces of men he'd served with, men who'd shared the hardest days of his life. "I've spent 24 years trying to explain what we did," he began, "to my family, to friends, to people who ask about the war. And I've never found the right words. Because how do you explain what it felt like? The exhaustion, the fear, the pride, the sense that you were part of something bigger than yourself." He paused, gathered his thoughts. "But I think the answer is simple. We were told no our entire lives. Told we weren't good enough, weren't smart enough, weren't brave enough. And then for 82 days in 1944, we were told, yes, yes, you can do this. Yes, we need you. Yes, you're essential. And we proved every single doubt wrong." The room was silent. "So when people ask me what I did in the war, I tell them I drove a truck. And by driving that truck, I helped free Europe. I helped win the war. I helped change what people thought black men could do." Henderson's voice grew stronger. That truck wasn't just carrying supplies. It was carrying the future, our future, and we delivered it on time against all odds. The applause started slowly, then built. Men stood, some crying, all remembering. Henderson sat down. Barnes leaned over. "That was good. That was true. Yeah." Finally figured out how to say it. On November 10th, 2004, Henderson died in his sleep at the age of 82. His obituary in the Philadelphia Tribune mentioned his service in World War II, his work with the Red Ball Express, his role in one of the most important logistics operations in military history. At his funeral, his son, the baby who'd been born while Henderson was overseas, stood to speak. He was 60 years old, a professor of history, and he'd spent his career studying the war his father had fought. "My father rarely talked about the Red Ball Express," he said. "When he did, he didn't talk about the glory or the excitement. He talked about the drivers who didn't make it back, about being so tired he hallucinated, about the feeling of keeping a truck moving when everything in his body screamed to stop." He paused, looking at the photo of his father in uniform, young and uncertain, not yet knowing what he would accomplish. But he also talked about pride, about the knowledge that he'd done something impossible, that he'd proved wrong everyone who doubted him. And he told me once near the end, "The war didn't change America, but we did. By refusing to quit, by proving what we could do, we forced America to see us differently. Not all at once. Not completely, but enough. Enough to matter." In the years since historians have written extensively about the Red Ball Express, the numbers are staggering. 412, 193 tons of supplies transported over 82 days. 6,000 trucks operating continuously. 23,000 drivers, 75% of them black, keeping an army moving against impossible odds. But numbers don't capture the human cost. The 127 drivers who died. The thousands who were injured. The men who came home changed, haunted by roads they'd never stopped driving in their dreams. And numbers don't capture the legacy. 3 years after the Red Ball Express ended, the military desegregated. 10 years later, the civil rights movement began in earnest. The connection isn't direct, isn't simple. But it's there, the knowledge that Black Americans had done something essential, had proved their capability, had earned respect through service and sacrifice. The Red Ball Express didn't end racism. didn't solve inequality, didn't create the America that Henderson hoped his son would inherit. But it was a beginning, a moment when the old excuses stopped working, when the mathematics of prejudice were confronted with the reality of competence. Today, if you drive through northern France, you can still see markers along the routes the convoys took. Small monuments in towns that were liberated. Plaques at depots that once processed millions of tons of supplies. The roads themselves rebuilt and modernized, still carrying traffic, just as they carried the weight of an army 70 years ago. And if you stop at these markers, if you read the names inscribed there, you'll find Henderson's name, and Barnes, and Walker's, and Johnson's, and hundreds of others who drove through exhaustion and fear and doubt to deliver something more important than supplies. They delivered proof. Proof that courage has no color. Proof that determination can overcome any obstacle. Proof that ordinary people asked to do extraordinary things will rise to the challenge. The Germans had calculated that Patton would stop. They'd used mathematics, logistics, physics, all the tools of modern warfare to prove that the American advance was unsustainable. They'd forgotten one variable, the human refusal to accept limits. Henderson understood that. Barnes understood it. Every driver who kept moving when logic said to stop understood it. They'd learned it from lives spent being told no, being told they couldn't, being told they didn't matter. And then they'd proved mile by mile, run by run, that they mattered more than anyone had imagined. The roar of 6,000 engines was the sound of America finding its conscience. Not all at once, not completely, but enough to matter. On the roads of France, the wheel marks have long since faded, but the memory remains carved into history by men who refused to quit, who kept the wheels turning, who understood that victory isn't won by generals studying maps. It's won by ordinary people, deciding that impossible just means not yet. If you believe their names deserve to be remembered, share this story. Write a name in the comments. Tell someone what these men did. Because memory is resistance. Memory is justice. Memory is the final victory over those who would erase what they accomplished. They built the Red Ball Express with determination and sacrifice. But it's remembered through love, our love for what they achieved, our gratitude for what they proved, our commitment to ensuring that their journey continues in every generation that refuses to accept limits on human potential. The convoy has stopped, but the road it paved continues stretching forward into a future they helped create 1 mile at a time, one act of courage at a time, one refusal to quit at a time.